When the successful black businessman Marcus Jackson was humiliated on an airplane because of the color of his skin, it seemed like just another episode in a long chain of racist insults. But this time, he decided he wouldn't tolerate it. Something inside him broke, and within a few days, he turned his personal humiliation into the beginning of a bold fight against systemic racism. So daring that it soon shook the entire industry. What happened next will astonish even those who have seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Marcus Jackson, a successful African-American businessman, takes his seat in the first-class section of a major airline's flight. He's set for a long trip from Los Angeles to New York and is looking forward to enjoying the comfort of the flight. Over the years, Marcus had achieved significant success in business. He had recently closed a deal that opened doors for him into the world of elite investments. This flight symbolized another victory for him. He was eager to relax and enjoy some well-deserved rest. But shortly after settling in, he notices one of the flight attendants watching him closely. He tries to ignore it, attributing it to professionalism, but soon his suspicions are confirmed. When Marcus tries to stow his carry-on in the overhead bin, the flight attendant approaches him and, with a polite yet cold tone, says, "Excuse me, sir, are you sure this is your seat in first class? Perhaps you made a mistake. Your seat might be in economy." At first, Marcus doesn't pay much attention to it and calmly responds, "Yes, this is my seat." However, she doesn't move away, continuing to stand there as if expecting something more from him. Marcus pulls out his ticket and shows her that the seat indeed belongs to him. She glances at the ticket briefly and instead of apologizing adds, "We need to make sure everything is in order, sir." A sense of discontent rises within Marcus. He realizes that this is more than just a simple misunderstanding. Sensing the cold attitude, he decides not to engage in conflict and sits down. But as soon as he fastens his seatbelt, the flight attendant returns, this time with a colleague. "We need to check your documents, sir," the other one says, clearly wanting to assert that they have every right to ask for this. Marcus feels the crowd around him paying close attention to what's happening. People behind him are whispering, some are giggling. He feels the tension building. Trying to remain calm, he pulls out his passport and hands it to the flight attendants. They check it with visible reluctance, as if hoping to find some violation. At that moment, Marcus hears a disdainful whisper from a passenger in the neighboring row, who mutters, "People like him don't belong here." Those words echo in his head. He feels a surge of anger, but keeps his composure, knowing that any outburst would only play into their hands. The flight attendants, having confirmed that everything was in order, walk away without offering an apology. Marcus remains in his seat feeling humiliated. To everyone around him, he wasn't just a passenger, but the target of biased treatment because of his skin color. After the flight attendants left, the tension in the cabin didn't subside. Marcus tried to calm down and regain his composure, but inside he was still boiling. He felt the stares of other passengers, some of whom were looking at him with open disdain. It's one thing to face small prejudices in everyday life, but it's another to be publicly humiliated among people who see themselves as superior simply because of the color of their skin. A few minutes later, as the plane prepared for takeoff, one of the passengers from a neighboring row, a middle-aged man with an expression of irritation on his face, leaned over and sneered. "Maybe next time you should choose a more appropriate class. First class isn't for everyone." His voice dripped with venom, and the words were loud enough for other passengers to hear. Marcus looked at him, trying to keep his emotions in check. A whirlwind of thoughts rushed through his mind. Should he respond or remain silent? At that moment, one of the flight attendants who had previously checked on him approached them. Instead of diffusing the situation, she sarcastically remarked, "We can offer you a different seat if you're uncomfortable." This was the last straw. Marcus couldn't believe his ears. He took a deep breath and, suppressing his anger, calmly replied, "I'm fine where I am. This is my seat, and I'm not moving." But the passenger in the neighboring row continued to press. "You're just causing problems. If you don't belong here, you'd be better off leaving." These words elicited laughter from a few other passengers, with some even encouraging the man, further escalating the tension. Marcus felt his patience wearing thin. He could have stood up and responded to the insults, but he knew that was exactly what they expected from him. Instead, he pulled out his phone and turned on the camera, starting to film the incident. His calm movements infuriated the man across from him. The man began to rise from his seat, but at that moment, the flight attendant intervened, finally realizing that the situation was spiraling out of control. "Please, sir, calm down," she addressed the man, belatedly trying to resolve the conflict. But it was too late. The situation had already escalated, and the atmosphere in the cabin grew even more tense. The man sat back down, still muttering under his breath, but now other passengers started to express their displeasure with the unfolding scene. One of them loudly declared, "It's all just a show for the camera. That's why people like him never know their place." Marcus, maintaining his composure, continued filming. He realized that this wasn't just an ordinary scene of racism. This was a moment of truth that he needed to capture. After landing, Marcus left the plane without saying a word, but inside he was seething. He knew that staying silent about such incidents only allowed them to happen again and again, not just to him, but to other black people. Upon entering the airport waiting area, Marcus opened his phone and uploaded the video he had filmed during the flight to social media. He accompanied it with a brief comment. "Today, in 2024, I was humiliated on a flight by one of the largest airlines simply because of my skin color. This is unacceptable, and these situations need to stop." He knew the video would spark a reaction, but he didn't expect just how big it would be. The video quickly gained momentum. Within hours, it garnered thousands of views and comments. People began sharing it, supporting Marcus and expressing outrage over the discrimination. Among the comments were stories from others who had also faced racism and unfair treatment in public places. The situation began to evolve into a large-scale movement, and by the end of the day, Marcus had already given several interviews to various media outlets. The media quickly picked up the story. The next day, news channels were broadcasting clips showing flight attendants trying to humiliate Marcus, while passengers made racist remarks. The reports told the story of how a successful black businessman became a victim of systemic discrimination, even in a supposedly civilized space like an airline's first-class cabin. Under public pressure, the airline was forced to issue a statement. However, their initial response was highly unsuccessful. They claimed that the situation was a misunderstanding and offered only formal apologies without admitting any fault. This only intensified the criticism. People began calling for a boycott of the airline, accusing it of covering up systemic racism. Marcus, who by that point had influence in business circles and strong support on social media, was determined to continue the fight. Large companies began joining the conversation, voicing their opinions on the need to reconsider policies regarding discrimination and bias. This turned into a national scandal that couldn't be ignored. Each new day brought more attention to the story. However, for Marcus, this wasn't just a public humiliation. It became a personal mission. He understood that this fight was no longer just about him. It was a fight for everyone who had ever faced similar injustice. Now he had the opportunity to use his voice and platform to bring about changes on a larger scale. As his story continued to blow up in the media, Marcus received calls from lawyers, activists, and representatives of various organizations offering their help and resources to further the fight. He knew that ahead of him lay an important stage, a battle not just for justice for himself, but for changing the entire system that allowed such incidents to happen again and again. After several days of intense media attention to his situation, Marcus felt like he was at a crossroads. All the noise surrounding the video on social media and the media's focus had made his story iconic, but it also became a source of enormous stress. He started to feel pressure from all sides. Doubts began to creep into his mind. Was it worth stirring up this story? Perhaps it would have been better to just leave it behind and move on. He realized that now it wasn't just his reputation on the line, but also his future as a businessman. One evening, sitting in his office, Marcus couldn't shake the thoughts of how this incident reminded him of the long chain of racial humiliations he had endured throughout his life. He recalled how, after university, he wasn't hired simply because of his skin color, despite having excellent grades and qualifications. How, as a child, he was teased at school and not allowed to play with other kids because he was black. All those moments, which he had tried to leave in the past, resurfaced in his memory. However, at that moment, his family supported him. His wife Sarah, who had always stood by his side, said to him, "You did the right thing. You're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for all of us. For our children, for a future where things like this won't happen anymore." These words helped Marcus regain his confidence in his actions. It became clear to him that this fight was bigger than himself. It was for everyone who had faced injustice throughout their lives. Support also came from friends, colleagues, and even strangers. Marcus began receiving letters and messages from people all over the country, many of whom shared their own stories of battling racism and discrimination. The messages came from ordinary citizens and influential figures alike. One such person was a well-known civil rights advocate who offered to help organize public speeches and rallies in support of Marcus and other victims of discrimination. Moreover, activists on the ground quickly organized a campaign in support of Marcus. Hashtags were created and online campaigns began, urging people to share their stories and raise awareness of racism in public spaces. Activist communities and civil rights groups united to draw attention to the broader issue of systemic discrimination in the service and transportation sectors. Family, friends, and the community became a powerful support system for Marcos in that moment. Their backing allowed him to realize that he was not alone in this fight. He decided that he wouldn't give up and would go all the way. Now, it was clear to him that the fight had to grow from a personal conflict into a public movement. Marcos began actively engaging with leaders of various social justice movements, organizing meetings and speaking on different platforms. Every step he took was now covered by the media, giving him even more opportunities to get his message across to a wide audience. Marcos felt that his mission was becoming increasingly significant. His internal resolve grew stronger with each passing day. Now he saw before him not just a fight for justice, but an opportunity to make real changes in a system that had long been blind to the problems of racism and discrimination. Amid this public storm, Marcos continued receiving support not only from activists and friends, but also from business partners. One of these individuals was James Carter, a well-known investor and an old friend of Marcos, who had long followed his career and admired his resilience. During one of their conversations, James made an unexpected proposal. "What if we didn't just fight the system from the outside? What if you became part of this system to change it? I'm talking about buying a controlling stake in the airline." These words took Marcus by surprise. The idea seemed bold and even a little crazy. At first he laughed, trying to imagine himself as the owner of a major airline, but James was serious. "You think this airline is an impregnable fortress, but with your achievements and my connections, it's entirely possible. Instead of just demanding change, let's create it ourselves." Marcus thought it over. There was logic in the proposal. He understood that fighting for justice from the outside could be long and exhausting, but if he was on the inside, in a key position, he would have a real opportunity to influence policies and processes, and not just for himself, but for all passengers who had ever faced injustice and bias. He could be the one to set a new standard in the industry, where equality and respect for every passenger would be foundational principles. Within a few days, Marcus and James began buying up shares in the company. The process was long and complex, but Marcus felt that he was now in control of the situation. Every step brought him closer to the ultimate goal. By the time public pressure on the airline reached its peak, they and James already owned a significant portion of the stock. And then came the moment when Marcus acquired the controlling stake. It was an incredible feeling. From being a humiliated passenger, he had become one of the key shareholders of the airline that had tried to belittle him. This transformation was more than just a business move. It was a powerful symbol that the fight for justice could take the most unexpected forms. The next day, Marcus held a press conference. Journalists crowded the hall, eager to hear his statement. Marcus calmly stepped onto the stage and, holding the microphone, began to speak. "Recently, I was the victim of a racist incident aboard this airline. This wasn't the first time I faced discrimination, but I decided it would be the last. Instead of waiting for changes to happen on their own, I decided to make them myself. Today, I'm here not just as a passenger, but as the new owner of a controlling stake in this airline. And now, things will be different. His statement became a sensation. The news spread rapidly across all channels and social media. Marcos had not only exposed the systemic problem of discrimination, but had also positioned himself in a place where he could truly influence change. After the announcement that Marcos had become the owner of a controlling stake in the airline, public attention to his story became even more intense. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Marcos, realizing that he had a huge responsibility, didn't delay in making changes. He convened an emergency meeting with the company's leadership, where he made it clear that the airline's policies would be completely revised. Marcos's first step was to fire the employees involved in the incident. This was a decision he made without hesitation. However, for him, this wasn't enough. He understood that the problem ran deeper and touched the entire corporate culture, so he announced the introduction of a new anti-racism and discrimination program. All employees of the airline, from flight attendants to executives, would now be required to undergo training in cultural literacy and respect for diversity. Marcos implemented mandatory training sessions that all company employees had to attend multiple times a year. These trainings included not only theoretical knowledge, but also practical skills in interacting with clients from different cultures and races. He also strengthened passenger rights protections, ensuring that all complaints would be addressed promptly and fairly. Moreover, Marcos introduced a zero-tolerance policy toward any manifestations of discrimination or bias on board the planes. Passengers could now count on their rights being protected at all levels of service. Marcos personally oversaw that every complaint was carefully reviewed and appropriate measures were taken. Significant attention was given to the publicity of these changes. Marcos gave several interviews to major media outlets, where he discussed the new initiatives and explained how important it was to fight systemic racism not only within one company, but across the entire industry. As a result, the airline became an example of how businesses could respond to criticism and transform under public pressure. A few months after the changes were implemented, the results became noticeable. Customers of the company began sharing their positive impressions of the new level of service. Marcos not only improved the airline's reputation, but also significantly increased its profits, as people began to support a brand that had become a symbol of the fight for justice. But Marcos didn't stop there. He began lobbying for legislative changes regarding passenger rights protection. He succeeded in getting new laws passed that tightened the responsibility of airlines for discriminatory actions against passengers. Eventually, his initiative spread across the entire airline industry, forcing other companies to reconsider their policies. For Marcos, this was not just a victory in a personal struggle. He felt that he had changed a system that had been deaf to the problems of racism and discrimination for so long. He became a symbol of change, proving that even one person, faced with injustice, could change an entire industry. Marcos's story inspired many people around the world. It showed that the fight against discrimination could have real results, and that those who face injustice could not only resist, but also win. Marcos completed his journey as a businessman with even greater determination to continue the fight for justice, knowing that there was still much work ahead. But he had already achieved what once seemed impossible. He had changed the rules of the game on his own terms.